Welcome to A Deeper Dive. We've created this podcast to explore ideas and trends for the new era of business. We'll strip away the hype, eliminate the buzzwords, and focus on giving you a clear understanding and some knowledge that you can use in the real world. Each program is broken into 5 segments, exploring the concept, how it works, and at least 2 use cases from real-world experience. The final segment in each series focuses on how you can get started and leverage the concept in your day-to-day business. We also have a website where you can find links, references, and other additional info at www.deeperdive.tech or on itworldcanada.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter and resource guides. This series is sponsored by Wipro Canada, who offer end-to-end best practice solutions that help Canadian businesses and communities. Our hosts are
Jim Love, a CIO and business strategist with IT World Canada and co-author of Digital Transformation in the First Person.
And I'm Doug Sparks from the University of Waterloo's Conrad School of Entrepreneurship and Business.
And now, the 3rd episode in our series on scenario planning. Case study number 1, 3D printing.
We're going to change things up for the next 2 episodes, Doug.
Okay.
The idea for this section was to get out into the real world and look for case studies and stories. Now, we promised to ensure that we had some use cases for each series to show how what we're talking about works in the real world. So in this case of scenario planning, we're going to look at indicators of future case studies. Yes, back to the future.
Okay. And this is what Walk called predetermined elements, or sometimes referred to as the context.
Exactly. And in a typical Walk fashion, he described what he was talking about in terms of stories. He used the image of rain falling in a river basin. And when you see that, you know that there'll be flooding downstream. That's inevitable. And he always added this touch of the exotic. I love this. He referred to the river Ganges at times, and other times it was the Nile. But I think it's just a way of breaking people out of their comfort zone and getting them to look at things differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think he even used the term reperceiving as describing this.
Yeah, and I think you have to be really careful when we talk about Walker this way. He was unconventional. I think he was eccentric, and he was a bit of a dreamer. Yeah, but you'd be doing his ideas a disservice if you didn't recognize that he was talking in metaphor, because his rain metaphor was exactly that. It's a metaphor, and in his personal papers and his discussions with planners, he held a much more focused and concrete way of talking. He was looking for what he termed as predetermined events. It rains one day upstream, floods downstream the next. These are events that have already occurred or ones that could be easily predicted if we open our eyes.
Yeah, and so the job of the scenario planning team is to help develop these scenarios. He saw it not as imagining, he saw it as hard, concrete work. He talks about how this is tough but essential work. And they also had to generate scenarios that represented real options, things that could be done differently in response to the inevitable global forces.
Yeah. Well, Walk talked about 2 types of scenarios, right? There was global scenarios, and these go by various names, learning scenarios, there's all kinds of names for them. But learning scenarios was one of the other terms he used. But these are big, predetermined events.
Yeah, they set the context. Then there's another set of scenarios. He referred to these as specific scenarios, or in contrast to learning, these were the decision scenarios. This is where you get the option creation and planning. In fact, he said you cannot do specific scenarios until you've done the global scenarios.
So in this episode, we're going to look at how to get started reperceiving, seeing these global scenarios. And in our next episode, we'll take these to the more specific scenarios.
Yeah, and there may be more than one. In fact, it seems that in many cases, there are a number of these percolating around in the background. And then with the introduction of some triggering event, it's like a catalytic effect and accelerates the changes.
Like the pandemic.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah. Walk said, the more uncertain the world is, the more attention planners must bring to identifying these predetermined events that change the way decision makers see the world.
And there's no question we are in a very uncertain world right now. As we talked about in previous episodes, there's so many things going on that can act as triggers. And so the question for us is, how do we do the type of focused brainstorming to develop the global scenarios that we need to power scenario planning? And my suggestion, take a framework that forces you to consider new options.
Yeah. I like to use the pestle framework, invented by somebody from Harvard. What are the chances?
Yeah. Well, we'll still use it.
Oh, ooh, jealous, academic jealousy there. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's really there's nothing mysterious to these things. These frameworks just force you to think outside and to consider new options. So PESTLE is short for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental forces.
I think we've kind of had our fill of political and maybe even economic for a while. So let's just stick closer to home with our own areas of expertise, social and technological trends.
Okay, so technological gives me some place to leap off from in there. I did a little brainstorming with myself.
I hope you didn't get into any arguments or fights or anything like that. You do your Golem imitation,
Jim. Terrible.
Yeah.
Yes,
My precious, yes, scenarios.
yeah. No, I actually I came up with a couple of areas I'd like to explore, but I'd like to focus on one in technology and put us in the context of a manufacturer. And here's a big key technology that I think we need to consider. And just as a leaping off point, 3D printing. I did my voracious and in-depth research. Well, actually, I heard a commercial on a U.S. cable channel. A company was but actually, this works out seriously. A company was advertising 3D printing as a way of manufacturing close to home.
Yeah.
So I'll turn this over to you, Doug. Can 3D printing really be used for printing more than the toys and things the junk we have all over our office?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, 3D printing can be used for manufacturing metal parts, things like turbine blades for airplane engines. It can be used. It's been used for developing like laying down concrete, stuff like that. It can even be used for bio materials, sort of like making custom bones for if you need a bone replacement, or even work being done right now on using it to create tissues for, say, artificial organs and stuff like that. So it has a wide range of applications. But what we're really talking about here is additive manufacturing. Kind of think of it as, rather than taking material off of a piece like you would with, say, a lathe or something like that, we add layers of material. So with metals, you put down a powder, melt it with a laser, put down another layer, and so on, and build up the structure that we're working with.
So this is starting to look like, remember digital cameras that came out? They were sort of like toys and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden you had Nikon cameras that were just like absolutely, then we were in 4K and wow, there's no more film.
Yeah.
Are we getting to that sort of acceleration with digital, with 3D printing?
I think we could. I mean, just the other day I was looking around on Amazon thinking I could get a 3D printer at home here. And there's a wide range of models that are not super expensive. You can get a wide range of materials that you can use to create products you want. So you link that up with sort of CAD applications, computer-aided design applications up on the cloud. And, you could have systems where you develop something up on the cloud. Maybe you decide that you want to create a custom piece for your bicycle or something like that, and then download it to have it printed on your home 3D printer.
So, and I know you remember this would have been like a decade ago, but when we saw this new process for prototypes, and it was just going to blow everything away because you could do a quick prototype for a manufacturing. Now we're talking about going straight from plan to actual manufacture of a custom element.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a company last week, and rather than looking at getting parts produced overseas, they were actually developing everything using 3D printing. They were developing all of their pieces. Sure, they went out and bought things like chips and things like that to put on their circuit boards, but even the circuit boards are made with 3D printing. And then they would assemble it and do the testing and everything here in Ontario. So, I think it's got a lot of potential for really speeding up the design, develop, and launch cycle for new products.
So I think this fits the classification of a predetermined event. This is going to happen, whether it's fully there now yet. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is where we branch out and we talk about the interrelatedness of all things, but we ask ourselves some questions and we use the framework the PESTLE framework. So political. Now, I joked about this being, on American cable networks, and guess what I was listening to? The political environment there. But there is a real protectionist element that's coming up. We're starting to hear "Made in America" again and things like that. So
Yeah.
there's a protectionist element that all of our politics that's coming in that is going to insist that manufacturing, or at least favor manufacturing, being done close to home.
Yeah, I mean, the geopolitical scene is changing rapidly as well. But what you've identified also, and what really came out recently with the pandemic, is increased focus on things like supply chain resilience, making our supply chains less vulnerable to shocks from trade battles and pandemics and all those kind of things. You couple that with some of the other sort of context type trends, declining oil demand, prices, renewable energy is becoming more competitive. So that's changing sort of the energy markets. And then the wide distribution of broadband access in general. Increasingly government policy is to try and push more broadband out. So
okay, help me out with this: the broadband and where does broadband fit into this?
Well, broadband, when you think of it, if you're going to have things like distributed manufacturing, so if you were to have, sort of an industry that's based on 3D printing in a distributed fashion, you want to be able to have the ability to have sort of rapid and reliable and high downloads between the cloud and your device.
Because you got to send a lot of information probably on a lot of these parts.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us into this. And the other thing that comes in when you think about this is an economic sort of thing, this just-in-time delivery. I mean, one of the reasons why our supply chains are so fragile is we put in just-in-time. It saved a lot of money, but boy, oh boy, it sure, when you can't get a part, try and buy anything, try and buy a bike, try and buy anything these days, and you just can't get them.
The earlier example I gave about the company making their parts with 3D printing, really what, they're at that stage of growth where it doesn't make economic sense for them to have it manufacture parts overseas and have it sent over with a container load. They literally build the parts they need as the orders come in. So it's true just-in-time manufacturing. They don't have to have transportation and everything else. They just build it as they need it.
Yeah, and I think if you ever put in the true cost of petroleum, and this goes back to the political, Biden was talking about, the subsidization of oil companies. And I'm not getting political on this myself, but, if we really reflect the true cost, both the environmental cost and the economic cost of petroleum and that transportation, goods would be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
Interesting. So social, let's try the social element in this thing.
Sure.
So, we've got the gig economy, right? And you've got maker communities coming out. You've got people who are highly skilled living remotely. There's just a whole pile of different social phenomena. Part of it from the pandemic, people are moving further out from city centers and things like that. Now, can we see that driving part of this change in manufacturing?
Yeah, well, you think of things like engineering and design as a service. A company wants to build a new part. They contract somebody. They do all the design work. It's up on the cloud. They send it to the manufacturer to have it built using their 3D printers. If there's a problem, they have a high turnaround time. Once those files, the CAD files are sort of frozen, you can start manufacturing as required. And so from a gig economy point of view, if I have expertise, I think in the last Gardner strategic technology thing, they identified what they called the democratization of expertise. And this is what we're talking about, where I could be living in Northern Ontario at my cottage and doing contract work and having a 3D printer. I could build the prototypes locally if I want to look at them or send them off for building. So it changes relationships with the different players in the industry. And so, and as you say, you take out transportation costs and things, so it's got cost implications as well.
So let's try legal then. We've talked about this. So
there's a bunch of different things. I think there's two aspects. One is going to be related to climate change. So changes in legislation and regulations trying to push to more, carbon-free, carbon neutral, all that kind of stuff. But also legislation around right to repair, wanting to make devices so that I'm able to fix them myself if I want to. And this changes sort of the logistics for things. If my stove breaks down, there's no reason why I have to buy a new stove. The cost, the way they've designed the circuit board of my stove, literally I have to buy a new stove, right? That's crazy. So there's those type of things.
The right to repair, and this is serious stuff. This is, talk about predetermined. This is happening. Yeah, it is going to happen. And you go back to the social and the power of the customer. The customer is not going to give up their power. This is going to be something that people insist on.
Yeah.
And let's tie it all together with the environmental, because the environmental piece, like I said, if we get an acceleration of climate change, any signal. Well, actually, I don't know what more signals you'd need. You've got wildfires, you've got hurricanes, you've got unstable climate. Everything that the climate modelers tell you says that this is accelerating. But if we were to get to 3 degrees or predict 4 degrees or start that accelerating much faster, there'll be a lot of action. In many cases.
Yeah. People moving around, migrations, climate refugees, all that kind of stuff is on the horizon.
Okay. So that, I think, hopefully that gives our audience a sense of what you do. Walk would say, now get to work, research, learn, develop these, get the science behind them. And then we can take these to develop specific scenarios.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So we've asked my friend Amit Majithia from Wipro Canada to give us some examples of how companies that Wipro has worked with have met unexpected and devastating challenges to their business. Now, not surprisingly, we didn't have to look far for the challenges. With the pandemic out there, we can see that it's taken a real toll on companies. Now, these companies that Amit's going to talk about give us a way to see real events and their impact. And now, we're not saying they had formal scenario planning or that they got it right in all that instances, but they did have one thing in common. They looked at the future and they saw that companies needed to plan for the disruption of a digital future. So welcome, Amit.
Thank you, Jim. It's a real pleasure to talk to you and connect with you again. So
why don't we start with the Greater Toronto Airport Authority? That's a really great story.
Absolutely, Jim. So, like you said, every company has really had a big disruption in the business through the pandemic, just like ourselves, but organizations that are out there. And Toronto Pearson Airport is none. With the travel they do, they had a big impact. With their passenger flow suddenly cut from what they were last year to about 90% less, and that impacted their revenue significantly. The pandemic was a major impact on their business, right? And to your point, this is something that companies can't plan completely. But what they did do, and we've been working with the Toronto Pearson Airport for several years now. They're one of Canada's busiest and largest airports, as you know. And the vision is to be number one in the world. And then they chose Wipro several years ago as their IT strategic partner as part of this vision in terms of enhancing customer experience. And when COVID struck, they needed to get really on the front foot in how to make the airport a lot more safe, as well as, in terms of a healthy experience for everybody, both the passengers, the employees, as well as partners who use the airport. One of the things that we were working with collaboratively with the Pearson Airport was in terms of innovation, technology and innovation. How can technology innovation really address some of the business processes that we're doing, both from a passenger experience perspective, but also from an operational excellence perspective as well. And this has been something we've been working collaboratively over the last 3 years. And so when the COVID situation struck back in March, this really helped to make sure that we bring the right initiatives with them to address some of the challenges that we're going through.
Yeah, and it forces you to actually get there. I heard this phrase at a conference the other day, the COVID silver lining. And it wasn't to trivialize COVID, but it was that some companies would take this challenge and look to ways to seize opportunities. What did they do?
Yeah, so we worked with them, as I said. What the key thing that was there was really making sure that as I mentioned, was the experience for employees as well as the passengers was seamless and safe. So quite a few initiatives that we worked in terms of bringing this collaborative innovation opportunities that we've been working with them. So several initiatives. First of all is really to bring sort of wearable devices that would enable social distancing as well as contact tracing to enable that to happen. That was the first thing. The second thing was really to look at as you check in as a passenger, how can you make that whole check-in process as seamless as well as both from a check-in right up to the boarding experience. And the third thing was around, using AR, VR technologies to look at reimagining what the new norm is going to be for a passenger as well as the employees at the airport. So those were the sort of critical initiatives that were kicked off straight away, as well as things like 3D printing. 3D printing for sort of maintenance management. All the maintenance that is done at the airport. But how can you use 3D printing for example, on spares? That the whole supply chain, as you know, Jim, was disrupted significantly around the world. So using 3D printing was another key aspect of making sure that you had access to various supplies in terms of main parts that needed maintenance, critical maintenance parts.
Wow. Sounds like I've heard the story that, the pandemic made us go 5 years into the future. And it sounds like you went a little further than that even. It's amazing in terms of so I guess this must have disrupted the plans. What was it like to turn this around like that?
It was great. I think the key thing is, as mentioned earlier, was when these sort of scenarios happen, obviously everybody steps up, right? Everybody comes up with a lot of different initiatives straight away. But the fact that both ourselves as well as the Pearson Airport were working on major innovative initiatives back almost 3 years ago since then, so this framework of having an innovation ways of working was already set in place. So it's just about tapping into this framework and then using the sort of collaborative ways of working to unleash those ideas, right? And if that hadn't happened, it would have taken a lot longer to come out of these initiatives, to sort of implement them and to come up with the ideas as well as to implement them going forward.
Yeah. So COVID-19 wasn't the real scenario that the companies were planning for, but pursuing digital transformation as a means of responding to an uncertain future. Even if we didn't get the exact nature of the threat right, they did see that the future contained massive uncertainty and started that work. And I guess they realized the secret to dealing with those issues is to embrace technology and agility in your organization. Great story. Good lessons to learn.
In our next segment, we'll return with our second case study on remote work. And in the last episode, we'll give you a starter's guide to getting going with scenario planning in your company. Each of these episodes will be available in text, and we'll publish some key tools and resources. You'll find this on itworldcanada.com/deeperdive or at the podcast site deeperdive.tech. That's deeperdive.tech. This series is sponsored by Wipro Canada, who offer end-to-end best practice solutions that help Canadian businesses and communities. See you next time. I'm James Roy.